I had not slept through a full night in 10 years. That is not a complaint. It is a fact, the way the cold is a fact in Veldran's high passes, the way the ironwood keeps walls are a fact, stone and permanence and no apology. I had accepted it. You accept what you cannot change, or you spend your life at war with the shape of things, and I had enough war. The wolf spirit fractured in the 9th year of my reign on the last night of the Greyville campaign. I remember the moment. I remember the way the cursed singer stepped out of the tree line, a thing hired by Lord Corran's retreating forces, thin and gray-robed, with hands that moved in patterns I had never seen, and I remember thinking absurdly that she looked tired. Then the sound came. It had no real sound, not one the ear catches, but the wolf inside me heard it as something tearing, the way rope tears when the load is too great and the fibers go one by one and then all at once. And then there was only the noise. My wolf had been with me since the day of my first shift, at 13 in the snow behind the stables. He had been steady and deliberate, not warm. Wolves are not warm the way people mean warm, but present, a weight behind my ribs, a second knowing I had learned to trust. After the cursed singer's working, he was none of those things. He was a trapped thing. A furious, terrified, enormous thing in a space too small for him, and that space was me, and he did not know me anymore. The healers came in the first year. 12 of them over the course of 12 months, each summoned by my council with the particular urgency of men who need a problem solved, and will not accept that some problems do not have solutions yet. Spirit binders from the Eastern Lodges. A moon healer from Caervon who had broken 3 curse workings in her career. A pack elder from Veldrath with 60 years of wolf bond experience, who held my wrist for 20 minutes and then set it down gently and said he was sorry. A pair of twins from the high academies, who communicated with each other in glances, and left on the 3rd day without explanation. None of them could reach him. The wolf spirit in his fractured state was not simply angry. Anger you can meet, counter, outweigh. He was terrified, which is worse, because terror has no logic and no patience and no capacity for negotiation. He could not tell the difference between a threat and a hand extended in help, and so he treated them as the same thing, which meant every attempt to approach him ended in a surge that sent the room's wards screaming and the healers backing through the door. I had learned to manage it. Management is not healing, but it keeps people safe, which was all I wanted. Once a month on the night the moon was darkest, when the wolf's agitation peaked, I went to the isolation chamber in the deep mountain below the keep, and I stayed there through the night. The chamber had been built for this, warded walls, an iron door with a viewing grate, a stone floor that could be washed. My steward knew the schedule. My lord's council knew not to summon me on those nights. My people knew their king went into the mountain once a month and came out looking tired and fine, and they were gracious enough not to ask questions about the tired part. It was a life. It was my life. I was not unhappy exactly. I was the kind of man who had stopped measuring himself against happiness, which is its own kind of peace. I will tell you honestly that when Lord Aldrich brought the matter of Senna of the Marsh Reaches to the council table, I did not look up from the border maps I was reading. A spirit-reader, he said, and I could hear the distaste in it even through the careful council voice he kept for formal sessions. Lord Aldrich was not a man who believed in spirit-readers. Lord Aldrich barely believed in wolf spirits, which was impressive given that his king had won, and it was actively disrupting quarterly governance schedules. From the Reach villages, she has apparently made a reputation reading bound spirits, fractured bonds, cursed signatures, in the Marsh settlements. In the Marsh settlements, Lord Fennec repeated, which was his way of pointing out that Marsh settlements were not a recommendation. She's a traveling reader, Aldrich continued. No academy training, no lodge affiliation. She takes work village to village, marsh to coast. The reports are varied. I did look up then, varied how? Some say she has real ability, some say she is a convincing fraud. He paused. Most of the reports that say she has real ability come from people who are not academically positioned to assess the difference. Meaning common people, I said. Meaning people without formal training in wolf bond or spirit work methodology. Yes. I looked back at the maps. Send her, I said. There was a silence. My lord, Aldrich said carefully, we have exhausted, I want to be fair in how I say this, we have worked through the healers with genuine credentials. This woman is. Send her, I said again. She cannot do worse than the twins from the high academies who left without speaking to me. Pay her the standard consulting rate. Give her a room in the West Tower, not the servant quarters. I won't have it said we treated her badly, and have Steward Paris show her the chamber before you bring her to me. I found the border road I had been looking for on the map and marked it. That's all. She arrived on a Thursday in the rain. I know it was a Thursday because Thursdays are the day my steward brings the grain allocation reports, and I was reviewing them at my desk by the window when the gay traders came in with her, and I saw her from 3 floors up, a slight figure in a travel-worn gray cloak, pack over one shoulder, no horse, which meant she had walked the last 4 miles from the road junction in the rain without apparent complaint. She stood in the courtyard while the gay traders sorted her entry papers, and she looked up at the keep with the expression of someone assessing a building's structural condition, calm and methodical, and then she looked down again and waited. She was brought to me an hour later, still in the travel cloak, which Steward Paris had apparently offered to take, and she had apparently declined. She was smaller than I expected, small in the way of marsh people, lean and efficient, with the kind of stillness that doesn't come from training. It comes from spending years in places where sudden movement startles things you'd rather not startle. She had dark eyes that took in the room without commentary, and when she looked at me directly there was no performance in it, no particular awe, no studied deference, no compensatory confidence. Just looking. Calder Voss, she said, I've read the summary your counsel sent. And I said, and I'll look at the chamber and I'll see your wolf, and I'll tell you honestly what I find. I don't make promises in advance of the work. If that's a problem, tell me now and I'll walk back to the road. Lord Aldrich, who was standing just inside the door, drew a breath. I raised a hand and he held it. It's not a problem, I said. She looked at me for another moment, the same structural assessment she'd given the keep from the courtyard. Then she nodded. Good, she said. Show me the chamber. I showed her myself. I don't know why. Paris could have done it, Aldrich had offered, but there was something about the way she moved through the keep's corridors, taking it all in without making a production of it, occasionally asking precise practical questions about the ward architecture. How old are these sigils? Who refreshes them and how often? Has the stone in this section been replaced since the chamber was built? That I found I did not want to leave to someone else. I watched her crouch at the chamber door and trace a fingertip along the ward line in the stone without touching the active layer, and I watched her stand up and look at the iron viewing grate, and I watched her go inside and stand in the center and be still for a long moment with her eyes closed. What do you hear? I asked. I don't hear, she said, eyes still closed. I read, there's a difference. She opened her eyes. He's been in here a long time, your wolf. The room holds the shape of him, the way a room holds the shape of whoever sleeps in it if they sleep in it long enough. She looked at the walls. He's very large. Yes. And he doesn't know where he is most of the time, does he? I looked at her. No, I said. Not most of the time. She nodded slowly as if I had confirmed something she already half knew. I'll need 3 nights, she said. I won't touch the wards. I won't try to approach him directly on the first night. I'll just be present. If that sends him into a surge, we stop and I give you my honest assessment of why it didn't work. But I don't think it will. You don't think it will? I said. No, she looked at me with those dark, unnewsworthy eyes. You're afraid of him, she said, and it was not an accusation, just the structural observation, the way she had noted the ward age. Not afraid of what he'll do to others. Afraid of what he is now. You're grieving him. The room was very quiet. Yes, I said. Then don't tell my counsel that. Something moved in her face, not quite a smile, the motion just before a smile, like light on water before the wind settles. I won't, she said. She was given the West Tower room. She ate supper in it alone, which she had requested. I ate in my study, which I usually did, and stared at grain allocation numbers without reading them. My wolf was not quiet that night. He was never quiet, but that night he moved in me with a particular restlessness, a circling I hadn't felt in years, not the terrified lunging that preceded his worst nights, but something more like pacing. The way a wolf paces when something new has entered its territory, and it is deciding what to make of it. I pressed the heel of my hand to my sternum and breathed, the way you do when the wolf pushes up and you need to hold the space. Easy, I said, under my breath, which was useless. He hadn't responded to voice in a decade, but I said it anyway. Old habit. He did not settle, but the pacing was different from the lunging, and I lay awake in the dark and thought about a woman standing in a stone chamber with her eyes closed, and saying he doesn't know where he is, most of the time. No one had ever said that before. 12 healers, 2 years of academy correspondence, 6 years of monthly management, and no one had said that. They had said, the curse signature is complex. The fracture point is deep. The aggressive presentation suggests the wolf spirit has lost the ability to distinguish between internal and external stimuli. Clinical language, all of it accurate, none of it the same as he doesn't know where he is. I did not know why it mattered. I told myself it didn't. I went asleep at some point after midnight and dreamed, not of the wolf, but of the marsh, reed, and cold water which I had never visited, and somewhere in the reed sound the thin suggestion of someone humming, low and unhurried. The first night. I watched from the grate. I always watch from the grate on the difficult nights, not because I could do anything from there, but because it seemed wrong to be elsewhere. Senna entered the chamber at the 9th bell, as she had agreed. She carried nothing, no instruments, no ward tools, no prepared sigil work. She set down her pack outside the door when she came in, which I noticed. She sat on the floor, cross-legged, in the center of the room, and she was still. The wolf came. Not the way he came when healers tried to work on him, not the sudden burst, the surge that hit the wards like a breaking wave. He came the way he comes when he is afraid. Gradually, the way a tide comes, the pressure building under the sternum, behind the eyes and the hands. I gripped the iron of the grate and breathed. From inside the chamber there was nothing to see. The wolf exists in the space between the body and the world, and what he does there is not visible unless it breaks through into motion, which in my case means I move without deciding to, which means I was extremely careful to remain gripping the grate. The wolf surged. I felt it hit the chamber's warding from the inside, which I had not felt so clearly before. Usually the wards muted it, absorbed the energy into the stone. This time I felt the precise shape of the impact, his full weight, his full terror directed at the center of the room, at her. She did not move. Not a flinch, not a shift of the shoulders. She sat on the stone floor in the center of the chamber, and the wolf spirit broke against the warding around her. She was carrying her own wards, I realized. Small ones worked into her clothing, not aggressive, just a buffer, and she sat in the middle of it, and she did not move. The wolf surged again. And again. And then stopped. He had never stopped before. Not when the moon healer from Kervan went still. Not when the pack elder waited. He stopped for her, and I don't know what to call the sensation that went through me in that moment. It was not relief, not yet. It was something before relief, the fraction of a second before you understand that a thing you were braced for is not coming. He did not settle. He retreated to the edge of what I can feel of him, which is a long distance, which is the place he has lived for 10 years. But he stopped, and he stayed stopped. After a long time, Senna uncrossed her legs and stood up from the stone floor slowly, the way you move when you've been still long enough that your body needs to remember how. She looked around the chamber once. Then she looked directly at the grate. "He'll circle tonight," she said to me through the iron. "He's not ready to come closer, but he'll circle. You should sleep." "I don't sleep," I said, "on these nights." "I know," she said. "Sleep anyway, I'll be here." I did not sleep. But I sat in the chair I kept in the outer corridor, and I closed my eyes, and the wolf circled and did not surge again. And at some point I must have been somewhere close to sleep, because the humming reached me, low and without melody exactly, more like the sound of a voice thinking out loud, shaping sound rather than music. And I was in the dark behind my eyes listening to it, and the wolf circled, and at no point tried to come through. When I opened my eyes, it was an hour before first light. The corridor was cold. My neck ached from the chair. Through the grate, Senna was still sitting on the floor, now with her back against the wall, eyes closed, still humming. I watched her for a long time. I could not have explained why, except that it was the first night in 10 years that I had been in the vicinity of the isolation chamber, and not spent every moment of it braced for the next surge. There was a looseness in the bracing I did not know how to name. She opened her eyes, found the grate without looking for it. "That's night one," she said. "Yes," I said. "He's listening." A pause. "He doesn't trust yet, but he's listening. That's different from what he's been doing." "What has he been doing?" She thought about it. "Not listening," she said, "just reacting. The reaction is the only thing he knows how to do when he's afraid, but he listened tonight, that's something." I stood up from the chair and stretched the ache out of my neck. "You should eat," I said, "and sleep. You were in there all night." "So were you," she said, with the almost a smile again, the motion before the motion. "I'm used to it," I said. "So am I," she said. The second night. Lord Aldrich came to me before the evening meal with the careful expression he wore when he had something to say that he expected me to resist. I knew the expression. I had catalogued it over 15 years of shared governance. "The Marsh Reader," he said, settling across from me in the study. "Some of the lords are asking questions." "What questions?" "About her credentials, her methodology. There's concern that she's given the sensitivity of the situation, not the sort of professional whose involvement we want widely known." He chose his words the way you choose footing on a wet slope. "If there's no result from this, the optics of having brought in a Marsh traveling reader, as opposed to, say, a lodge-certified practitioner." "Aldrich," I said. "My lord." She sat in the isolation chamber for a full night, and my wolf did not surge once after the first hour. I looked at him. In 10 years no one has managed that, not the Moon Healer, not the Pack Elder, not the twins. She sat on the stone floor and hummed, and he listened. When you bring me a lodge-certified practitioner who can do the same, I'll worry about the optics. Until then, manage the lords and leave her to her work. Aldrich was quiet for a moment. "You watched all night," he said. "It was not a question." "Yes." "Through the grate." "Yes." He said nothing, but his expression shifted slightly, in a way I chose not to examine. "As you say, my lord," he said, and left. The second night. She did the same, set down her pack outside the door, went in alone, sat cross-legged in the center of the chamber. But she did not wait in silence. Almost immediately she began to hum, and this time I could hear it better from the grate, could hear that it was not a song exactly but a sound shape, something she was making with her breath and the back of her throat, patient and low. The wolf came faster this time. Not the surge, he crossed the distance between deep inside and near the surface faster than he usually moved, and I gripped the grate without thinking about it. But he did not surge. He came close and he stopped, and I could feel him there at the edge, closer than he had been in years. Closer than I had been able to bear for years, because near meant near the surface meant one wrong moment from breaking through, and I had spent a decade carefully preventing that. But she was humming, and the wolf was listening. I watched her for an hour. She did not move, did not open her eyes, just continued the sound. And I became aware, gradually, that I was not bracing. The habitual tight-shouldered, locked-jaw, hands-on iron bracing that I maintained on these nights, it was loosening, not from conscious decision but from something else, something coming from the wolf's end. He was not at peace. Peace was too strong a word. But he was not afraid, and when the wolf is not afraid, I can breathe at something closer to a normal depth. I breathed. I pressed my forehead against the cool iron of the grate, and I breathed, and I listened to her hum. And somewhere in the middle of the second hour, she shifted slightly and began to include something that was almost words. Not any language I knew, not quite any language, more like the shadow of language, the shape of address. The way you speak to something when you want it to know it is being spoken to, not instructed or commanded, just acknowledged. My wolf moved. Not a lunge. A slow thing, a wondering thing. I felt him orient, the way an old wolf orients when something enters the room that is worth orienting toward. Felt the precise turning of his attention from everywhere at once to one point. Her. I had not felt him orient toward anything specific in 10 years. The terror had taken that from him, the ability to choose a direction, to distinguish one thing from the wash of noise and fear. He had just been everywhere, pressing in every direction at once, a fractured and furious omnidirection. He was looking at her. I realized I was crying. Not weeping, not dramatically, nothing my face would show clearly in the chamber grate's dim light, just my eyes wet, the involuntary kind, the kind that happens when something has been held too long and something else releases it. I pressed my forehead harder against the iron and breathed. She was still humming. Somewhere in the middle of the night she said, soft, still not opening her eyes, "He's there, isn't he, right at the edge?" "Yes," I said. My voice was steady. I was grateful for that. "He can hear you," she said. "You could talk to him." "He hasn't responded to voice in 10 years. "He wasn't listening in 10 years, she said. "He's listening now." A long pause. The hum continued under the silence. "What do I say?" I said. "Whatever you would have said," she said, "if you'd known he could still hear." I was quiet for a long time. The wolf held at the edge, oriented toward her, and I stood in the outer corridor with my forehead against the grate, and I said very quietly the things I had not said in 10 years because I had believed they would not reach him. That I was sorry for the night of the campaign, that I had not known the cursed singer was there, that I would have taken it differently if I had known what it would cost him, that I had missed him. That I had to stop and start again. That I was sorry it had taken this long to find someone who could hear him. The wolf did not move. He held at the edge, oriented toward Senna, and the chamber was quiet and she hummed. At some point, still holding the edge, he went still. Not retreat, not the usual retreat to the deep place where I can barely feel him. He went still at the edge, the way a wolf goes still when it finally stops running, and it is not because it has given up but because it has found something worth stopping for. It was the most present I had felt him in 10 years. I sat down in the chair in the corridor, and I did not sleep this time. I watched through the grate until the light began to change and the humming finally ceased, and Senna opened her eyes and looked at the ceiling for a moment and then at the grate. "Tomorrow night," she said. "Yes," I said. She looked at me through the iron, and this time the almost smile completed itself, small, specific, unperformed. "You should eat something," she said. "You look like a man who forgot supper." "I did forget supper," I said. "So did I," she said. "We're even." The third night. The day was ordinary. I held a border meeting with 2 of my lords, reviewed the grain allocations I had been failing to read all week, walked the upper wall of the keep in the early afternoon because I needed to be in the cold air and moving. The wolf was quieter during the day than he had been in years, not silent, never fully silent, but the omnidirectional pressing had eased to something more contained, as if he had redistributed himself from everywhere at once to simply here, simply close. I was aware of where Senna was in the keep, in the way you are sometimes aware of a person without having to locate them consciously. She ate in the great hall at midday, which surprised me. I had expected her to continue eating in her room, alone, as she had been doing. She sat at the end of one of the lower tables and ate her food with the same unhurried efficiency she did everything. And my lords and their people gave her a range of looks from incurious to subtly skeptical to openly dismissive, and she did not appear to notice or mind. Lord Phoenix said something to Lord Aldrich that I could not hear from the head table, and they both glanced toward her, and I looked at them until they looked away. She caught me looking at her once, across the length of the great hall, and she tilted her head slightly, the almost smile, and went back to her food. I ate the rest of my meal looking at the grain reports I had brought to the table, which was not something I normally did at meals, and which told me things about myself that I was not prepared to examine in public. She came to my study in the mid-afternoon. I had not summoned her. She knocked and waited. "Come in," I said. She came in and looked around the study with the same structural attention she gave every room, then sat across from me without being invited, which I found I did not mind. "Tonight," she said, "I want to tell you what might happen, so you're not caught by it." "Go ahead." "If he's ready, and I think he is, I think last night was the preparing, he'll come forward instead of holding at the edge. Not a surge, a choice. And when he does, the bond will have a surface to work with." She paused. "Your wolf bond is fractured, but it's not broken. The mate thread is still there. It's been trying to complete itself for a long time, and it can't because the fracture disrupts the channel. If he chooses to come forward tonight, and if I am what I think I am to him, then the thread will complete. Both of us will carry a mark." I was very still. "You think you are his mate tanker," I said. "I think it's possible," she said. "I'm not telling you to prepare you for a claim or a commitment or anything you haven't agreed to. I'm telling you because the mark will be on my wrist as well as yours, and I didn't want you to see it and not understand what it means." She looked at me directly. "It doesn't bind you to anything you don't want. The bond is a bridge. You still choose what you build on it." I looked at her for a long time. The wolf, deep in me, had gone very still in the way he had gone still at the edge last night, not retreat, not fear. The orientation, that precise turning of attention. "I understand," I said. "Good," she said. And then, as if she had delivered a weather report and the matter was concluded, she stood up. "I'll see you at the 9th bell then." "Senna," I said. She paused. "Thank you," I said, "for telling me." She looked at me for a moment with those plain, clear eyes. "You should have been told 10 years ago," she said, "that he was still there, that he was just lost." A pause. "I'm sorry it took this long." She left. I sat in the study for a long time, not reading anything, with my hand pressed flat on the desk and the wolf still and oriented, and thought about 10 years. Thought about the string of healers who had come and assessed and left, and the things none of them had said, and the things she had said in the first hour. "You're grieving him." The third night, the 9th bell. She went in. I stood at the grate. She sat in the center of the chamber, cross-legged as before, and began the humming at once, not waiting tonight, the sound beginning almost before she had finished settling. The wolf did not wait either. He came forward immediately, as if he had been positioned just behind the surface all day, waiting for the bell the way you wait for something you have decided toward. He came forward and he stopped at the edge, and he oriented. And then slowly, for the first time in 10 years, he pressed forward from the edge. I want to explain what this felt like, and I find I cannot, not completely. I can say that in 10 years I had become accustomed to the wolf as a force behind the surface, a pressure to be managed, contained, braced against. I had not felt him move toward anything since the campaign night. To feel him move toward something, deliberately, with intention, to feel his weight shift from contained to reaching, was like a door opening in a house where I had been telling myself there were no more rooms. He crossed the distance slowly. She was humming. The chamber held the sound, bounced it back, and he moved through it toward her the way something moves toward warmth, not the desperate heat-seeking of the freezing, not urgency, just the recognition that warmth is there and one is cold, and the two facts relate to each other. He stopped 3 feet from her. She opened her eyes. The chamber was not lit for this. There was no visible wolf. There was no glow, no magic made cinematic. What happened was quiet and internal and visible only in the way that she looked up from the stone floor, and I felt, through the grate, the specific shape of the wolf's stillness change. Not retreat, not fear, the other thing, the thing I had no name for yet. She said very softly something I couldn't hear through the iron, not the humming, words, specific ones spoken to him directly. The wolf lowered his head. I felt the weight of him shift forward and down, the way a wolf's weight shifts when it lowers its head, and the understanding of what this was arrived in me slowly, because I had not seen it in 10 years and had stopped expecting to see it ever again. He was bowing. His wolf spirit, fractured and terrified and trapped in the dark for a decade, was bowing. And then the mark. I felt it on my wrist before I saw it, a heat, like a coal placed under the skin, deliberate and specific, not painful but impossible to misidentify. I looked down at my wrist in the corridor's dim light and watched the mate mark surface in the skin, a pattern that looked like both a wolf's track and a river's current depending on how the light hit it, dark and unmistakable. Through the grate I saw her look down at her own wrist. She sat with it for a moment. Then she looked up at me through the iron, and for the first time since she had arrived at Ironwood Keep, her face was not a structural assessment. It was something else, something she was not performing and had not prepared. He bowed, she said. I know, I said. I felt it. Does he? She stopped. Started again. Does he feel different? I pressed my hand to my chest. The wolf was there, not at the edge, not pressing in all directions at once, not lost, just there. The specific, weighted presence I remembered from before the campaign night, from the 13 years before the cursed singer and the tearing and the noise. He was tired. He was quiet. He was, for the first time in 10 years, somewhere I could find him. Yes, I said, he feels different. She put her face in her hands. Just for a moment, a brief, private thing that she didn't hide and didn't perform. And then she lifted her head again, and she was as composed as she always was, but her eyes were wet, and I thought. So were mine, the second night, and she had the grace not to mention it, and I would have the grace not to mention this. I'll open the door, I said. I did not use the door release from the corridor. I went around to the main entrance, which I had not walked through in 10 years. I had always used the outer corridor, the grate, the management position, and I opened it and walked in. The chamber was small and cold and smelled of stone and the low reed-in cold water scent of her. She was still seated on the floor, her pack outside where she always left it. She looked up at me when I came in, and I sat down on the floor across from her, because it seemed wrong to stand over her in this moment, and we looked at each other for a moment in the dim chamber light. The wolf was still. He was present and still, and I could feel him as clearly as I could feel my own heartbeat, and I could feel, it is difficult to say this with the precision it deserves, I could feel the direction of his attention. He was looking at her, not with fear, not with the fractured terror of a lost thing, with recognition. He knows you, I said. Yes, she said. Did he always, from the beginning? She thought about it carefully, the way she thought about everything. I think he recognized the potential, she said. The first night, when he stopped surging, I think part of what stopped him was that something in him knew what I was, even if the rest of him didn't. The fracture doesn't take away what a wolf knows. It just makes it harder to get to. I looked at the mark on my wrist. She was looking at hers. I meant what I said, she said. This doesn't bind you to anything you haven't chosen. I know, I said. I'm choosing. She looked up. I want to be very clear, I said, because I suspect you are the sort of person who would mistake me for someone acting out of obligation, and I don't want that between us." I looked at her directly. "My wolf just bowed. He has not bowed to anything in 10 years. He knows what you are, and so do I, and I am not a man who mistakes the shape of a thing." A pause. "I am choosing, if you want the same." A long quiet. The chamber held it. Somewhere outside the keep, the wind moved through the high passes, which you can hear from down here if you know to listen for it, a thin, cold sound, completely ordinary. "I want the same," she said. I brought her out of the chamber and into the corridor and her pack, and we walked up through the mountain corridors and into the keep's main hall, because I had decided in the chamber how this would go. Lord Aldrich was awake. He was always awake on my isolation nights, one of the things we did not discuss directly but I had always known. He came into the hall with Lord Fenwick close behind him, both in their robes, both with the particular expression of men who have been waiting for information, and are now reading the information in my face before I give it. I stopped in the center of the hall. I held up my wrist. The mark was clear in the hall's torchlight, dark and unmistakable, the pattern that was both a wolf's track and a river's current. Aldrich looked at it. His face went through several things. "The wolf," he said, "is he." "Still," I said. "He is still, he is present, he is himself." My voice did not shake. I had decided it would not, and it did not. She reached him. In 3 nights she did what no one has done in a decade. Fenwick was looking at Senna. His look was one I recognized from the great hall, from the councils, from the way the lords and their people had been looking at her since she arrived, the calibrating look, the reorientation of assessment. "She is my mate," I said. "The mark is on both our wrists. The bond is complete." I looked at Aldrich, then at Fenwick, then at the 2 household guards who had come in with them and were now standing with the careful blankness of men who will follow what happens next carefully and recount it accurately. "I am telling you before anything else is done, because I will not have it said that I let the court learn it from rumor or from document. You are hearing it from me now in this hall." A silence. Lord Aldrich, who was a difficult man and a careful one, and who had called her a traveling marsh reader with exactly the intonation he reserved for things he did not respect, looked at the mark on my wrist for a long moment. Then he looked at her. Then he inclined his head toward her, not a deep bow, not a formal one, but a genuine one, the kind that comes from recalibration rather than protocol. "My lady," he said. Fenwick followed. Then the guards, and it was the guards' movement that mattered, because the guards' movement was not commanded and not performed. It was the movement of men who had been in the outer corridor on isolation nights, who knew the shape of what had been unmanageable, and who had just been told it was done. Senna stood beside me in the hall and received it all with the same structural calm she brought to everything. And then she looked at me, and the almost smile completed itself again, and this time it stayed. She did not change after. That is the thing I want to say about her now from the distance of the years since. She did not change. The court changed, the way courts change when they must, gradually and with occasional reluctance, but change. Aldrich changed the fastest, which surprised me until I understood that he was a man who cared about results above all else, and the result of her 3 nights in the isolation chamber was a king who could govern without one hand always occupied with containment, which turned out to be worth considerably more to Lord Aldrich than theoretical credentialing. Fenwick took longer, but he came around. The rest followed as they always do. Senna remained what she was. She walked through the keep with the same unhurried attention, asked the same precise practical questions about things that interested her, ate in the great hall when she felt like company and in her rooms when she did not. She had opinions about the ward architecture, which she shared with the keep's bindermaster in direct terms that the bindermaster found startling, and then, gradually, useful. She had no interest in the formal ceremonies of court, which she attended when necessary and found quietly ridiculous, and I found that I no longer found them as necessary as I once had, which was probably her influence and probably good for everyone. The wolf was himself again. It is a strange thing to say after 10 years, but that is what it was, himself. Not cured exactly, the fracture had left its mark, the way injuries leave their mark, and there were nights when the old fear surfaced and I had to breathe through it, and she would be beside me, humming, low and without melody, patient and unhurried, and the wolf would orient and settle. He was never going to be the wolf I had at 13, steady and untroubled. But he was mine again and I was his, and we both knew where we were. There is a thing she does in the evenings when we are in the study with the fire low and the keep quiet. She asks me what I looked at that day, not what I did or decided or managed, but what I looked at. As in, what did I actually see with my eyes that I would remember? I have learned to pay attention during the day to have something worth saying. The first time she asked, I said the marks on the grain route map where the eastern roads fork, which I had been studying all morning. She considered this and said she had looked at the ward line on the south corridor, where the stone had shifted slightly since the keep was built, and the line had bent to accommodate it, which she found interesting. We sat with that for a while, and she asked me what I looked at the day she arrived. I had to think. You, I said. From the window, you were in the courtyard in the rain and you looked up at the keep. I remember that, she said. I was trying to decide if the stonework could hold the ward expansion I was already thinking about even then. I know, I said. I could tell. She smiled, a full one, not the almost smile, the completed one. What did you think when you looked at me? I thought about it. I thought you looked like someone who had walked 4 miles in the rain and was not bothered by it, I said, and I thought I stopped. What? I thought my wolf had been pacing since the night before, I said, and when you looked up at the keep, he stopped pacing. I didn't know why then. She was quiet for a moment. He knew, she said. Yes, I said, he knew. She reached over and put her hand over mine, the way she does without announcement, as a plain and practical fact, the way she does everything. The mark on her wrist was against the mark on mine, which had become the most ordinary thing in the world and never stopped being, underneath the ordinary, the most extraordinary. The wolf was still. He was present and still, and he was looking at her, as he always was, as he had been since the moment she sat down on the chamber floor, and the terrified, fractured, lost part of him recognized the one thing the cursed singer's working had not been able to take. The knowledge of who he had been waiting for, in the dark, without knowing he was waiting. I have been a king for 22 years, and I have made decisions whose consequences lasted decades, and I have learned to know the shape of things that matter from the shape of things that merely seem to. She is the thing that matters. She has been the thing that mattered from the moment she stood in my courtyard in the rain and looked up at my keep with the eyes of someone assessing structural condition. And the wolf, who had not known where he was in 10 years, looked at her and knew exactly where he was. She is my mate, and the court that sent for her as a last resort and a skeptical measure bows to her now, not because I have asked them to, but because they have eyes and have learned to use them. And on the evenings when she asks me what I looked at today, the wolf settles low and easy in me, and I think this is what I looked at, and the fire is low, and the keep is quiet, and she is here, and we are both, after everything, exactly where we are supposed to be.